Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Growth Leap. I'm your host, Michel Gagnon. We talk to pretty awesome business builders who are designing disruptive and meaningful companies. San Francisco-based Notion is an all-in-one workspace for notes, docs, wikis, projects, and collaboration. The company is growing rapidly and recently expanded its presence in EMEA and APAC with a few key hires. Well, our guest today is one of them. Robbie O'Connor is General Manager EMEA and Notion's first feet on the ground here, in charge of the company's growth in the region. He's got an impressive track record, having worked at Microsoft, Google, Dropbox, and Asana. We cover quite a lot of ground during the discussion. We talk about growing Series B companies internationally, what tech startups need to go global, Notion's strategy to drive growth, Robbie's favorite strategic frameworks, and how to build high-performing teams. Enjoy the show. Robbie O'Connor, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm really good, Michelle. It's great to be here. It's great to speak with you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thanks for your time. Robbie, you're General Manager EMEA at Notion, and before that, you've worked for other well-known tech companies. Before we really get started, can you give us an overview a bit of your background and experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I joined Notion a couple of months ago as the company is beginning to scale internationally, and I lead the region for EMEA. And we're just really early days. We're getting set up. Previous to Notion, I worked in Asana, where I was the head of sales for EMEA and kind of led the go-to-market operations there for 4 years, which was a ton of fun. And previous to that, I worked in Dropbox, where similarly I was the first hired for Dropbox in the region within EMEA, and performed numerous roles there as the company scaled over about 4 years. I started my career really with Google, again, where I was for 4 years again, where I worked with a really cool team there in Google Maps and Google Geo. My birth, I guess, within technology was I did an internship in Microsoft here in Dublin in their European Operations Centre, which kind of gave me my passion for working in tech, for working in international environments, and for working for really ambitious organizations.
It's a really impressive track record. And well, as you said, you just joined Notion a few months ago in the middle of a very, very challenging year for, pretty much everyone. But why did you feel Notion was the right step for you at this time?
I guess first and foremost, I'm a huge fan of leading edge technology. And over the last number of years, I've seen firsthand that there's been a generational shift in the tools that people are using in their lives and indeed in their work as well. A more tech-savvy generation are moving into the workforce and already have moved into the workforce. The basic tools aren't really going to work for them anymore. They want to be able to work in a more personalized experience now. I guess as part of my work over the last number of years, I've always made a point of understanding the landscape of tools that are making a difference. And Notion's been on my radar for a couple of years as a product that really is at the leading edge. When you meet users from companies who really enjoy a technology and that helps them to do something or anything better within their work, I think you see that there's a product there that has tremendous value. Interestingly, Notion's users and customer base are really widely distributed with an enormous presence in EMEA, in APAC. Our company is headquartered in San Francisco, but with such an international base, they've quickly seen the need to establish operations in regions to get closer to the users. I guess you learn a lot about yourself as your career develops. Part of my ambition is to continue to grow into being a world-class operator. And in recent years, I've learned that part of my strengths and my motivations are in the challenge of building things. After about 4 years in Asana, with the company moving into a new phase of its own growth and having been part of a great journey, I thought I was ready to bring my skills and my experience to a new challenge. So as I began to think about what I wanted to do next, I was connected with Notion's COO, Akshay Kathari, and the CEO, Ivan Zhao, through my network. And I learned more about their vision for the future of work and indeed for Notion. I was really inspired by the vision and just really sparked with them as people. I really loved the product personally, and I felt the business challenge of scaling international operations for this company was something where I could really help and probably make a decent level of impact. So you know what it's like with your career when you get a really good feeling about something, you really got to go with it. So it felt like all of the stars aligned here for me.
And you seem to have developed an expertise to help Series B, C companies grow and expand internationally. The tech company is specifically, and this is something that we've discussed in a prior call, you and I, where, when we talk about growth for tech companies, we talk about feature prioritization, customer service, and all of these things, but we don't necessarily talk about what is it that you need to do or implement to actually scale a tech company internationally. Can you tell us a bit about, since you've done that quite a few times, what are the key things, that you've learned, and what are the key elements that you feel are key for a tech company to expand?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of fun how I've ended up in this scenario as kind of repeating this playbook a couple of times. It may or may not seem unusual, but my career to date really hasn't followed a particular pattern, so to say. You meet many execs who have a very specific vision and everything is gearing up towards the direction that they're going in. Honestly, my career has been a little bit more pragmatic and opportunistic. It might sound odd, but my personality and how I'm wired has sort of dictated the decisions that I make. I love technology. I really like people. I really enjoy working on problems, particularly business problems. Leaving university, I was really fortunate to be hired by Google, and I was even more fortunate to join a really super niche team. At the time, Google was figuring out how to monetize the Google Maps API platform, and I joined just as the vision decided to build a SaaS-oriented go-to-market business and engine. So as a young buck, I was really fortunate to be part of a scaling journey in a very well-funded organization. It was almost like a startup within a very large organization. And I had front row seats to watch some really incredible leaders build a multifunctional division from the ground up. So then that kind of gave me my grounding on liking to build and move things forward at scale. I love working with this team, and I took the opportunity to learn as much about SaaS, about operations, about marketing, about sales as I possibly could, just kind of out of innate curiosity. I also built up a really great network of smart people who I knew would do great things into the future, and a couple of those characters I met down the line. I also have two brothers who are entrepreneurs. They run their own companies, and my own father had some of his own entrepreneurial ventures as well. I always admired how they take on real challenges and built their companies from scratch, taking on every risk from big to small. I know as a business owner yourself, you'll understand that very, very well. Although working for Google was really great, I always felt kind of insignificant in my brother's presence, as I feel like I'd taken like the safer corporate option. And while not having pure entrepreneur DNA myself, I guess my family always influenced me to want to drive a ton of impact in my career. When working in large organizations, unquestionably, it's really cool. You can do amazing, great work. But for me, I always had the sense that I want to be part of something a little bit smaller and have a higher level of impact. And I guess this is what kind of led me to find that juxtaposition where I was attracted to smaller organizations that were growing fast, because I felt that's kind of where my strength and my interest lied. As part of a mentoring program when I was in Google, I was connected to the CMO of Google Enterprise, a guy called Chris Farnacci, and we really hit it off. Chris introduced me to a number of things, one of them being viral growth models, which is like the mecca for all marketing teams. How do we get maximum brand exposure and growth with minimal budgetary input? Interestingly, at the time, Google was struggling to get many companies to adopt the G Suite platform, and Chris's job was to try and build that brand out there. They were competing against Microsoft. And so he showed me some organizations that were doing it really well. And he highlighted Dropbox for me. And he said, wow, this is just a company with a unique tool. It's not groundbreaking. Data storage has been there. They've just taken a unique angle on it. And look at the cult following they've managed to derive. And they're not spending too much money on marketing, but by word of mouth and NPS, this product is just growing really, really fast. And that really fascinated me. That little nugget really kind of got me. And I guess that was my first introduction to smaller startups who are scaling up, who are kind of growing. I then went home that week, and I don't think this is Chris's intention, but I dusted off my CV and I wrote an email into an exec in Dropbox and said, look, if you're ever looking to grow within Europe, I've got some great ideas of how you do it. And it just so happened that at the time, they were looking for international scaling growth. Small company then, just with massive user base and a lot of funding. They didn't necessarily know exactly what they wanted to do. They just knew they needed to catch up with their users. So I don't even think they were intending to hire someone with my profile. They wanted to hire someone more senior, but they kind of liked the look of me. And so they brought me on board. They hired a really great seasoned tech executive at that stage, a guy called Johan Butting. Johan now leads Slack. And together we were like an unusual mismatch from the start. Someone super experienced who really knew what they're doing, and just a very enthusiastic fan. And together we were the first two people hired in Europe. And I guess at the time, I was so fortunate I got to watch a world-class operator like Johan figure out what we want to do within the region, set a strategy, communicate with headquarters what the plan is, start understanding what type of teams we want to grow first, experiment a lot, and go from there. So I guess that was my first exposure to, interesting, a company that's at Series B. How does it get to the next level of growth? And ultimately, how does it architect its path towards becoming a public organization? Up until then, I didn't really understand that world. I was just on a great ride with a cool brand. I got to work really closely, as I mentioned, with Johan and the leadership team that he built as well as with the global functions, to understand a lot more about how you build operations particularly in a company that's going through a period of hypergrowth. How do you prioritize what markets you want to go after? How do you prioritize the target segments that you want to chase? How is that different for each different market? How do you coordinate and align your resources towards a coherent game plan? And how do you manage that while you're also hiring like hundreds of people? So I kind of became one of the early kind of young Turks, I guess. We would want to experiment. We'd have a hypothesis that we could build an inbound sales engine, and we'd just throw a couple of smart people at it to figure out how we would do that. And over the course of time, we'd figure out, is this something that's scalable? Does it work? Do we need to build a team here? Or is this something that needs to be put in the cooler for a little bit down the line? So I kind of became one of those people who was like, setting up new teams, building experimentation frameworks, setting milestones and checkpoints, and ascertaining whether something works or not. I guess Dropbox was in a unique position at the time because it was well funded and they did have the luxury of doing that. But I guess that taught me a lot of DNA around thinking about, how you set up your go-to-market operation to match your product ambitions, to match your marketing message as well. And so it was from there that another great mentor, the guy who actually hired me into Dropbox, they're called Oliver J, moved over to Asana as their CRO. And his boss was actually Chris Farinacci from Google, who'd come over as the COO. So we felt that there was good alignment. I felt I'd learned a lot about how to do these pieces with great mentorship from someone like Johan and Geraldine McCarthy, who now leads Personio in Europe for sales, and Adrian Gormley, who's now the COO of N26. We're all part of a really strong talent cluster, and I got to learn from them. So I felt I was ready to kind of do it myself this time around. And I joined Asana as their head of revenue for the region as well. It was a very different challenge with Asana. The company was at Series B. It was in a much more nascent, latent category around the kind of the project management category. And the company wasn't as well funded, even though it had a super strong founder in Dustin Moskovitz. So the challenge was basically to repeat this kind of playbook, but do so in a really, really efficient way. And that's where I had P&L responsibility for the first time, and probably had a lot of cross-functional responsibility as well, where we needed to ensure that our marketing team was staffed really well and that we had a very coherent strategy for the region, as well as ancillary functions like people operations and finance and HR within the region too. So it went reasonably well, and that company has gone through an impressive journey over the last little while, and I guess I felt like I was ready to go again.
If we step back a little bit on what you just said, and let's say you have a startup founder who's been, getting traction, getting good growth, and they're thinking about going international, what are the top 3 things that you think these people have to think about to make sure that the growth and the expansion is going smoothly?
A really, really good question, and a really important question. I think as a company moves into Series B territory, it's clearly a product or a service that people want or they need. You've done well and you've done enough to put a business in place that is attracting investment, and that there's people who are willing to put a lot of money behind you. And usually most of these companies will have a plan for what they want to do with their funding as it comes in. That can be build more products, that can be hire a bigger sales team because you feel like you've cracked the code for where you want to go, or it can be that you want to expand internationally. I think understanding what your ambition is around that is really important. Then when it comes to international scaling point, interesting one. So I guess first and foremost, I would ask the question of, is the company ready to scale? Because scaling takes on a whole new level of complexity, particularly internationally. Your legal team, your HR team, your culture, your management structure, is it ready to stretch now that you'll have new sites around the world? Are you able to support these people and give them a really positive working experience? I think it's the first thing I think about. Secondly, where is your product and who's using it? Is it in Japan? Is it in Korea? Is it in Europe? Are we seeing strong growth there by putting operations in regions? What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to accomplish by this? It can be very attractive and it can be like a thing to do to grow internationally. But the more figured out a company is about what exactly it wants to do by establishing international presence is really, really, really important. And then thirdly, I think hiring is really important. I think it's important to get the right people in place early. People who really assimilate to your culture quite well. People who've high EQ and can manage international relationships really, really well. People who can set a vision for the region and feed it back and acquire in a very tactful, professional manner the resources that they need to grow. And then finally, I'd throw in It's really important in my mind to have, a 2 year or even a 3 year vision, because what startups are like. It's a great idea at the beginning, and then you hit your operational difficulty side. You need to have a true north that you're heading towards, and it's really important for the whole company to be really, really aligned behind the drive towards expanding with your international user base, your customer base, and your ancillary operations, which follow suit.
I want to talk about Notion and the strategies and the experience that you've been through so far. But before we get into that, I just want to make sure everybody knows what Notion is and not make any assumptions, which is a great reflex to have when you build tech products. So can you give us a bit of a short overview what Notion is?
Yeah, of course. Notion is an all-in-one tool for notes, projects, documents, and collaboration. The tool can be used by individuals to keep their lives and notes organized, and by teams and even whole companies to coordinate the work of tens or thousands of individuals. We've over 1 million users worldwide, and we're used by thousands of teams to build wikis, project managements, share documents, and keep communications flowing all in one spot. The major challenges that Notion solves is lower productivity, people spending a ton of time searching for information, people repeating themselves and duplicating work where they can't find it already exists, notification overload and context switching, which is ruining focus. I guess Notion makes it really easy to find what you need, collaborate with others, and focus on more of your work in one place.
I have to confess, my first encounter, let's say, with Notion is quite similar to when I discovered Google back in the days. I remember I was at university. My roommate told me, man, you have to try this. There's that simple page with just one search box, and they find what you're looking for so fast. And they even tell you, how many seconds it took them. And somebody did the same thing with me for Notion. It was like, look at that. And it was a bit the similar, wow, aha type of experience. Can you share a bit with us what strategies the company put in place that explain that rapid and successful growth?
Yeah, absolutely. It's similar feedback to kind of what I've been hearing as I've joined Notion, as I'm talking with users and with companies who are using the tool as well. I guess people are getting a little bit tired of jumping through dozens of apps, tabs, notifications every day just to get one thing done. It limits focus and productivity, and it damages transparency because information gets siloed within separate tools, and it kind of squanders the time spent searching for the right resources or meeting, in person to stay aligned. We're really excited to have a massive and energized audience around the world. It's really, really global, but we're also focused on building the best product for enterprise customers with teams over like 1,000 users as well. It seems to be resonating really, really well with our user base. Our long-term vision is to give everyone the ability to shape the tools that shape their lives. You shouldn't have to know how to code to build the best tool to solve your problem, either in your personal life or in your work as well. And when everyone has the best tools to solve their problems, we've been able to tackle the world's biggest problems together, which I think is just like part of the philosophy of how the tool is set up, which resonates super, super well. On top of that, I think Notion has done a really, really good job of building tremendous feedback loops between our user base, our customer base, and our product team. And because the product team is really nimble and agile, we've been able to iterate really, really fast against what people's needs are. We have this really, really impressive tagging system within the organization. So every interaction with customers or with users, the topics that are discussed are tagged really well, and they're fastidiously poured over by our engineering team, who are able to spot what are the trends, the patterns, what are people asking for, and as I say, iterate and build really fast against what those needs are. So it's not always fast, but most of the time super, super fast. There's been a couple of features that have been waiting for a while to come. So I think what that's created a really strong connection and bond between the company, the product, and its user base and its customer base, which in turn has led to a really high NPS. And it's led to a very, very, very connected experience for our users and our customers, be it existing users, experienced users, or people who are using the product for the first time. And that as well has kind of resulted in strong viral growth of the product by people recommending it organically to their peers, to their friends, to their colleagues, which leads to that strong kind of halo of growth for the product. So for me, just a couple of months in, that seems like under the hood what's led to the growth. From the outside, before I joined the company, I had a similar experience to you. I was like, this is just really intuitive, smart technology, which I can pick up really easily. Kind of makes my work look really good. I'm not particularly someone who does things, presentations super stylishly or classily, but this tool helped me organize my thoughts and made me look good when I was jotting stuff down.
When you have a company who has such a rapid growth, great product, and good track record, and you have to pick it up and bring it to the next level in a different region, what are your top priorities? You don't have to tell me all of your secrets, but when you take Notion from where it is, you want to bring it to the next level in the EMEA region, how do you plan for this next phase?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. And obviously, it's something that I pore over constantly. It's I guess it's my job. EMEA is a really unique region. Like other regions, it has unique challenges. It's a different lock that needs a different key to unlock it. We've numerous markets that have different languages, different cultures. There's different trends that are happening within different countries, and there's different attitudes towards technologies or towards societal changes. And EMEA markets can operate at different paces also. Your brand can be super hot in Sweden, but non-existent in Spain. Some markets might find your tech liberating, others might find it invasive. In SaaS technology, you can find that your tech is really popular with personal users in one market, but no presence with businesses, or it can be completely vice versa in a market that's only a couple of 100 kilometers away. If you imagine with most of these technologies born in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, when you're dealing with a market like North America, just one big homogenous market, this can be like jarring or daunting to an organization when you show up and you've got all of these different needs and requirements. And in many ways, the most important element is to find a balance between having a very solid centralized brand while tailoring your messaging or your target segmentation in markets that you want to be present in. And I think you need to understand where you want to be present in first. Interestingly, most growing tech companies always score their first wins in the tech industry itself, right? Tech companies buy from tech companies. There's a few reasons for this. Tech companies are typically super forward-leaning and open to new technologies. Tech employees, regardless of where you are in the world, are seeming to increasingly look, think, act, and talk like each other. It's almost like there's no national boundaries in this particular industry. And so the early product is often designed with them in mind, as they're the primary feedback loop. In a sense, you see national growth really starting in tech companies and with strong startup presence in France and Germany and the UK and the Nordics and Benelux and in Southern Europe as well. It's usually when you kind of start scoring your first early wins and learning a lot about how you need to localize. The real challenge comes in your product when your product starts getting adopted by the broader economy. And can the company manage transition from marketing to other tech companies to pushing your marketing towards more traditional industries? And that's where you're localizing your product and localizing your approach becomes really, really important. And obviously starting with languages and messaging, which will open up your total addressable market outside of that kind of tech grouping, who are all English speakers. And it really becomes a whole new ballgame. In Germany, they might care about safety and privacy. In Sweden, they might care most about elegant design. In other economies, they might care about cost efficiency of your product as well. So you need to pick your messaging quite carefully. And as you scale, I think part of the EMEA skill is prioritizing and being strategic about who you're trying to sell to and how. It's different for every company, but it's a really fun ride. And again, for US or Silicon Valley headquartered organizations that are scaling in Europe, I think part of the executive team's challenge is crafting that vision and not making it seem too complicated and having a super strong plan which prioritizes where you want to go first and how you want to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Me being based in Berlin, originally from Canada, I've seen the complexity of the EMEA market, which also makes it such a beautiful place to live. But I'm interested in what you said about localization, user feedback, and all of that, because you've worked mainly for American companies. And one of the challenges when you are selling or you're doing customer support for a company who has a product and engineering team, probably centralized in a different market, you are always, let's say, pulled or in different directions, right? Because you want to make sure that, as you said, you're meeting the needs of your key users, your key markets, but at the same time, there is a centralized product and engineering team who has to prioritize things and build a platform that fits for as many markets as possible. So how have you managed that in the past and maybe more recently at Notion? What are your key secrets to be able to be the best friend of the P&E team in a different market and stay relevant and effective with your users in EMEA?
Yeah, it's it's where the rubber hits the road. And from a strategic perspective in this job, I guess my viewpoint there is that Some of it isn't rocket science, right? There's some really big economies in Europe. There are some industries and verticals that have strong economies themselves and strong buying power that your product is a super strong fit for. And then there's other industries which might be a little bit softer, but you might have a hunch about it being somewhere you could go. And then there's some easy decisions around where you definitely feel that you don't need to go. Hopefully, your data that you take from where your adoption already is can also be a nice overlay to set a basis on where your product is already showing green shoots of getting traction. And then you need to look at the resources that you have at hand as well. So with those three pieces, your intuition and your experience of where you think or there's really good growth, what your data is already telling you from your product, and then what are the resources at hand. There's a nice matrix that you can create there, which should hopefully act as a divining rod to help you make really good data-informed decisions about where you want to go. And I think the more stringent and strenuous you can be on that, it actually helps you form your strategy really well. And when you have a really strong strategy that's well versed and it's well socialized within the organization, that's where you can do a really good job of getting the right backing or the right internal support for kind of where you want to go. It's different for every company. Some companies are super resource heavy and you can do a lot of things at the same time. Some other companies are in the middle order. You can maybe pick 2 of 5 things that you want to do. And for some companies, you need to be ruthlessly rigorous in your prioritization and start where you think you can score the most points first, in my mind. I would say that I've seen a couple of times there's some repeatable playbooks, but I wouldn't say it here because it's quite different for every organization, in my mind.
Yeah. And you've talked about matrix or frameworks. Is there anything that you've been consistently using? Because a lot of people talk about mental model, about decision making. There was a nice podcast with, I think it's Daniel Ek, CEO of Spotify, on Tim Ferriss' show recently, where he talks about decision making and all of these things. Is there anything that you've been throughout the past few years consistently using and say, this thing makes my complex business so simple, helps me make decisions, it helps me prioritize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think working with Dustin Moskovitz in Asana, this is like what he is all about. And he is all about clarity. And he designed this matrix for how the company kind of makes decisions that he termed or called the pyramid of clarity. And it can work within companies from the top-down perspective. It can work within small teams. It can even be a personalized way to kind of set up your framework. So if you think about what's your mission, what are we trying to achieve here ultimately? And that is like at the top of the pyramid. Underneath that, what are our strategies in order to achieve that mission? Underpinning that, what are the objectives that we want to set in place in order to achieve that strategy? And then underneath that, what are the key results with which how we're going to measure the success or the failure of these objectives as well? So it seems kind of easy to say it out, but in essence, in reality, it can be tricky to put all these things together. However, I've certainly used it as a personalized framework for myself when managing teams or initiatives or projects. If you're just super clear on what we are trying to achieve here and everybody is really, really aligned to it, we have a well-discussed and aligned and agreed strategy, and everybody is on board with that as well. We have been ambitious and we've documented really well what are the objectives that we're going for. And these are what all our operations are based around upon. And then we have the right checkpoints and milestones in place to ensure that we're measuring whether the results are working. I guess that's kind of part of the skill of leadership and management, is being able to implement these things. I think what the lubricant that makes it all work really well is really clear and, in my opinion, really human communications as well. Being very deliberate about being over communicative and making sure that everybody is on board, is aligned, understands it. Anyone who doesn't understand it, take the time to make sure that they do understand it and their role to play in it, and that they're comfortable with it too. I think what makes it work, and because it sounds good to write it down, is really fast and candid feedback loops. If you can instill a culture within your teams where feedback is a blessing, is a gift, and the more candid people can be, and the more disarmed they can be in candid feedback, the quicker you're going to be able to double down on what works, and you're going to be able to squash the bugs that arise in the process as well. And then finally, from a leadership perspective, something that I've learned kind of sometimes painfully has been just consistency of thought and consistency of action. If you say something, follow through is really important. It helps people respect and understand and align to the decisions that you've made as well. So it's not something that came out of HBS or I read in some MBA program, but it's just a methodology that's kind of worked for me.
It all conceptually all makes sense. And I just want to break it down to the more granular level. You've talked about, being clear on objectives, missions, and all of these things. I don't want you to give me a lecture here, but if we try to break it down for the audience a bit better and pick one example, what would it look like? If you have an objective, what kind of objective would you have? How would you break it down? And then you talked about over-communicating. Over-communicating can be a very relative term, depending if you're a person of many words or not. So if we were to break this down into something a bit more concrete, what would it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we were to say that, let's take the example of setting up a sales team within a region for the first time. We say that our mission ultimately is to bring this great product to market with a really efficient sales engine and to develop a fun and rewarding culture along the path. I think everybody, if they read that statement or you're in a room with a group of people, they'd be like, yeah, I hear you. That's clear. We want to build a world-class team. We want to bring this great product to market and we want to have fun while we're doing it. Yeah, I'm behind that. Great. Everyone's on board. Okay, next step. What's our strategy? How are we going to do that? This is where we get a little bit more drilled into, what works with the product or what resources we have at hand or what our selling motion looks like. So the strategy then is we are first going to develop a new pipeline with a sales development function. We're going to invest in these marketing campaigns or programs to make it work. And we hope at the end of the day, we've run marketing campaigns, we've generated a pipeline, and we're able to sell to that target audience. So I think, again, everybody will understand. Great, I understand what our strategy here is. We want to build pipeline, we want to have marketing campaigns to do that, and we want to get the sales deal rolling. The objectives then are like, what are we actually going to do? So if we say that objective 1, by February, we want to have hired 3 new sales development reps into the team. By March, we want to have run 4 brand campaigns, 1 in Germany, 1 in the UK, 1 in Switzerland, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that are super measurable, really, really, really measurable. And that can be across different functions or different roles. And then finally, the key results are the numbers or the metrics that we have assigned to these objectives. So again, from the very beginning with the feedback piece or with the clarity and communications piece, if we're super clear on what our mission is, what our strategy is to achieve the mission, what are the objectives and key results which are going to underpin the strategy, making sure that everybody understands it. And then check-in points, monthly check-in. I set a reminder every month to just write a note to everybody within Notion to say what's going on in EMEA. Remind them of what our mission is and what our strategy is, and update them on how our objectives are performing against key KPIs. Being super open and human with what's working well and what's not working well, and then keeping a fun element to the communication and the cadence as well. And that invites, fast and candid feedback, as I mentioned before. And I think it demonstrates a consistency of thought and action.
You're a bit of a process builder, an organization builder, given the positions that you've had in the past and today. When you build a team from scratch, what are you looking for? What kind of profiles, experience are you trying to bring in?
Yes. So a crucial element to the science of how you get things right, obviously, is hiring and making sure you have not just great people, but the right people in accordance with what you need. For me, I think teams and companies have very different needs at different times. And my experience has taught me to not be too dogmatic or too rigid in your bias on where you stand on the axis of skills versus experience versus attitude. Personally, I've been part of scaling teams, and I probably hired more folks with that spike in the attitude and skill category. However, I certainly felt the burn of not having enough experience within the organization as well, or I've seen so much be unlocked by bringing on people with significant experience. As a leader, I think it's really important to consider what your team or a certain initiative that you're staffing for needs at any given time, and be super deliberate about how you staff the team while being mindful to strike a really strong balance. If you think of staffing like a football coach, a good team needs a mix of defenders, of midfielders, of strikers. You need some very dependable players. You need some really flair players. You need some people who are talkers. You need some people who don't talk at all. You need a healthy mix, because ultimately, growing and scaling, you're just tackling new problems every week, every month, every quarter, every year. Growing is resolving, figuring out problems. And I think you need to be able to think about things from multiple different viewpoints to kind of get it right. So that's why I always think about architecting in balance from the beginning. In terms of kind of traits that I look for, I do have some things that do kind of stick out or stand to mind to me. I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni, if anybody knows Patrick, and he's the author of the of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And he talks about 4 qualities that really do resonate with me. Talk about firstly smarts and EQ. So does somebody have good smarts? Are they smart? And that can be, can they figure out problems? But it can also be, do they have really high EQ? Can they read a situation well? Can they read the room well? Are they able to influence really, really well? Secondly, are they humble? Do they have humility? Is this someone who's going to do more for the team than do more for themselves? This is always a tough one to kind of decipher, because you do want people who are quite team oriented, or certainly have the right level of humility to fit well within your team, or to help you develop the right level of trust. And then finally, I think hunger is really important. I think hunger is super, super important. People who show a natural curiosity about their role, a desire to be really good at it, but also show curiosity about the broader business as well, which is really important, I think, in the early days of an organization. You don't really want somebody who's just siloed within their role, who only wants to do just their job or do the minimum there. You want people who are a little bit curious about how they can help other parts of the organization as well. So I guess that's my little framework for how I look at things.
But let's go back to Notion and the future. So and I know, again, you just started in the bigger scheme of things. You started yesterday. But what are your plans, for Notion and EMEA in the next, 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm so enjoying being in the startup scale up environment again. It's just such a fun time where there's so much potential and opportunity within an organization, and having been around the track a couple of times, I think I can pick my path in a deliberate fashion here quite well. So we don't have our plan laid out just yet. I'm still in the middle of figuring out exactly what we want to do. What we do know is that we have a really, really strong user base within EMEA, a really strong mix of personal users of Notion, of people who are using it within small teams, and then some really, really impressive large organizations who are already wall to wall with our tool. And I think in my 30, 60, 90-day plan, first of all, I wanted to do a listening tour. So I met with as many customers as I possibly could, as many users as I possibly could, just to listen around why they like the product, what they use it for, what we should be doing better, or how they'd like to see the product kind of grow and develop. And obviously fed that feedback back to our product team as well, with that cool tagging system that we have. I guess that gives me a good indication of what's possible and what the potential is. And working closely with our COO, with Akshay, as well as our marketing team, beginning to plot out, how we would go about over 3 years or so building our presence within the region, continuing to see our user growth grow, maintaining and strengthening our community presence within the region as well. Building our inside operations. What can we handle from our inside headquarters within EMEA? What are the processes and systems and teams that we need to set up initially to start building our monetization and our revenue engine? And then later down the line, do we need to grow beyond Dublin? Do we have a need for further presence in some of our core markets where we need to get even closer to some of our users? It's still early days, and the next 6 months and 12 months will tell me a lot more about what we need to do strategically in order to really win within the region. And I'm really looking forward to that challenge and just being part of an early stage journey. Notion, it's still only 72 people it is today, which is remarkable considering the number of users and the revenue that the company generates already. Really, really remarkable. And it really feels like a family. And I'm the new Irish cousin within the family, which is so much fun. And shortly, there'll be 6 European cousins, and then there'll be 20 European cousins, and then there'll be 50 European cousins, which I think is a fun ride for the whole company in general.
You've said that Notion has done a fantastic job with a relatively still small team so far. How can our audience, learn more, benefit from the Notion product or specific programs that you guys have?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can read up on Notion at notion.so, and you can learn all information around our tool. It's super easy to try our product and to sign up for it in a personal capacity for free. And I encourage everybody to kind of get stuck in and get your hands on the product, because it's pretty cool and pretty transformational, as people mentioned. We also run a pretty impressive program for startups, owing to the all-in-one nature of our tool. Notion is really, really useful, particularly for startups or organizations that need kind of an all-in-one solution for their work. And last year, we created a really good program called Notion for Startups, where startup organizations who are affiliated with a VC or an incubator or a startup hub of some form can benefit from $1,000 of Notion credits, which goes a really, really long way and gets you access to our teams or enterprise platform. We need VCs and incubators and hubs to sign up for our partnership program, which is available via notion.so/startups or notion.so/partners. We have a ton, we literally have hundreds of VCs, incubators, and hubs already signed up for this program. But anybody who wants access to that startup credit can encourage their affiliated companies to sign up for the partnership program, and we can go from there. If you don't see your program available there, just contact me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to try and get your organization set up as well.
I don't want to take too much of your time. No, you're busy and you have a lot on your plate. Any final thoughts or advice that you'd like to share with our audience before you go?
Yeah, of course. As you kind of alluded to earlier on, I guess the way that my career has kind of panned out has been that Series B guy. I think this is such a fun stage for an organization. I guess joining, I'm always very humbled by the people who've been there before. The real heroes are the people who've taken it from inception through to angel investment or bootstrap through to Series A and whatnot. And I always feel like you're standing on the shoulders of giants as you come on board. And those early stage people deserve so much of their props because they've literally got the machine up and running. But the Series B journey onwards is so much fun. It's really where your fish are cut bait, and it's where strategy becomes the most important thing I think you can do within your organization. So get used to strategy, learn to level up, learn to grow yourself. In hypergrowth, my former boss and a great mentor of mine, Oliver J., he reminded me that in hypergrowth, every 6 months, you're interviewing for your job again because the company has changed and it's become more complex. So if there's some advice I could give is that something I've always looked to do is continue to invest in yourself. Make sure that you're leveling up all the time. Make sure that, in 6 months' time, when the company's at a different stage, or in 12 months' time, you are still the person who's able to take on the challenges that will be there at that stage. And, sometimes if you forget that, you may find yourself just not having all the resources you need to do the job really well.
What's the best way for our audience to follow you, Robbie?
Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. I also post periodically on the company blog and whatnot. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Robbie O'Connor. I love networking. I love speaking with people generally about needs or issues. I'm happy to talk about Notion or technology anytime as well.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck for the next steps.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate that so much.
Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And as usual, you can find the show notes at stunena.com. Also, if you want to accelerate your startup growth and build something meaningful, well, check out our Growth Lead for Tech Startups online course at growth.stunena.com. Thanks a lot.